Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another 4 p.m. Second Look Bible Study, where a second look always takes you deeper into God's Word. We are in the midst of a study entitled Understanding the Old Testament. So far, we have covered Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And today, we are going to move into the book of Joshua. Now, as we have been working our way through, we have used this Old Testament timeline to kind of help us understand where we are in the story of Israel and God's dealing with them. So here's the timeline we've been looking at. You will notice that everything began with the creation, and that was told in the book of Genesis. And then we learned about the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Jacob's name was changed to Israel. That also took place in Genesis. From there, we went to Exodus, and it talked about the Exodus from Egypt. And the books that dealt with that were Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now we are moving to our next section, which is conquest. And that is the story of Joshua. So let's take a quick review of each of these books so that we can understand how everything fits together. Now, this will probably be the last time that I spend time going back and looking at Genesis and Exodus. So I hope you're feeling really familiar with those first 5 books. Genesis, we saw in our picture that it was a book of big N, beginnings, a book of beginnings. And it told the story of the beginning of the human race and the beginning of just about everything except for God. God always was. The second part of the book not only talks about the beginning of man, but the beginning of God's chosen people. He chose them to express his glory to this world. And so that's where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, and then, of course, his 12 sons, which will become the foundation of the 12 tribes of Israel. When Genesis ends, the children of Israel, or Jacob's kids, are in the land of Egypt. When we move into the book of Exodus, it's 450 years since the close of Genesis. During that period of time, the children of Israel have gone from welcomed guests to slaves in Egypt. The book of Exodus tells the story of the exiting by the children of Israel from the land of Egypt, and they're going to begin to move towards the promised land, the land that God had promised Abraham and his descendants. We can see in the picture that they're walking through an exit sign with Egypt in the background, and they're getting ready to cross the Red Sea. The next book that we looked at was the book of Leviticus. Now, once they were freed from the land of Egypt, they traveled to Mount Sinai, and at Mount Sinai, God gave them the 10 Commandments and instructions on how to build the tabernacle. When we move into the book of Leviticus, God is speaking from the tabernacle, calling to Moses. And Moses is instructed to set up a priesthood that the tribe of Levi, which was one of the original 12 tribes, would become the tribe of priests. And their main duty, all right, was offerings and feasts. And we can see that in the picture. You'll notice that the man wearing the Levi's in the middle of the picture represents the priest. We see somebody kissing his toe, and that's to remind us of Levi Tokus, Leviticus, all right? And the offerings and feasts were very special celebrations. Now, the offerings wasn't a money offering, it was a sacrificial offering, and we talked about 10 different sacrificial offerings. And then we looked at feasts, and there were 10 specific feasts that God had ordained for his people. That was the book of Leviticus. As we move from there, we move to the book of Numbers. And the book of Numbers was all about the wandering in the wilderness. The story that kind of creates this book and this story is when Moses had sent out spies into the land. He took one spy from each of the 12 tribes, and they were sent to scout out the land of Canaan. And 10 of the 12 spies came back with a negative report. The people were too big, they were too strong, there was no way that they were going to be able to conquer this land. 2 of the spies came back with a good report. Those 2 spies were Joshua and Caleb. And they said, hey, our God is with us. He helped us overcome the Egyptians. He's been with us throughout this wilderness experience. We can take over from the Canaanites. We can defeat them. The people sided with the 10 spies who gave a negative report. And as a result, God decreed that those people, the Israelites, would wander in the wilderness for the next 40 years. And they would die off, and only their children would remain. The book of Deuteronomy is the last book of the Pentateuch. And we see in our picture 2 sets of laws. The law A, which is in the background there, they're kind of clapping. They represent the 10 commandments that God gave in the book of Exodus. The second law, as you see, they're at the forefront, and they are singing a duet, and they are running on this man. It's Duet, Run on Me, or Deuteronomy. Again, these pictures will help you remember not only the name of the book, but what the book is all about. The book of Deuteronomy is about the second giving of the law. What Moses is doing, as they are just on the outskirts of the land of Canaan, the promised land, the holy land that God has given them, they are on the outskirts and they are waiting to march in and begin their conquest. But before they can do that, Moses is reminding them of their story. He's telling them how God delivered them from Egypt. He talks about how God has been with them. He pronounces blessings and curses. Blessings if they obey, and curses if they don't obey. And at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses dies. And Joshua, the one spy who brought back a good report along with Caleb, is made the ruler of Israel. So that brings us to our book title for today, and that is the book of Joshua. The theme of the book of Joshua, it narrates the Israelites' conquest and settlement of the promised land. Moses is dead, and Joshua is the new leader. This book is going to highlight God's faithfulness and the importance of obedience and the fulfillment of God's promises. So let's get ready to move ahead and to look at this particular book and see what the story really is. Again, Joshua is the book of conquest. You saw in the picture General Joshua conquering the land. After Moses' death, Joshua leads the Israelites into Canaan. They're going to cross the Jordan River miraculously, similar to the Red Sea crossing. The book then details the fall of Jericho. It talks about the Battle of Ai. Several additional battles follow where God's direct intervention aids the Israelites and they begin to conquer the land. Near the end of the book, the land is divided among the 12 tribes. And then the book of Joshua concludes with a farewell address by Joshua urging loyalty to God. And just like we saw in Deuteronomy, Joshua is going to die at the end of the book. Now, I have a question for you. Other than Jericho, can you name any of the other battles that took place in the book of Joshua? If you can, take a minute and go ahead and place them in the comment section there so that I can see your responses. Again, responses really help the channel to grow because the more that you respond, the more you comment, the more you like, the more people see these videos. And so I encourage you to share what is your favorite battle if you can think of any. All right. So let's move from that overview to the key events that take place in the book of Joshua. You can see on the little graphic that I put together here that chapters 3 and 4 talk about the crossing of the Jordan River. And this is very significant, and we're going to explain how it was similar to the Red Sea crossing. Following that, chapter 6, the Battle of Jericho. Chapters 7 and 8, the Battle of Ai. And then in chapter 10, the Southern Campaign, which I spelled wrong, please forgive me. And then chapter 11 is the Northern Campaign. Chapters 12 through 21 talk about the division of the land and who gets what land and where the 12 tribes are going to be. And I'll be sharing a map with you as we look at that. And finally, in chapters 23 and 24, we have Joshua's farewell address. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the crossing of the Jordan in chapters 3 and 4. Now, Joshua leads the Israelites across the Jordan River. The Jordan River parts, allowing their passage, reminding us of the Red Sea crossing under Moses. Here's how they were similar, and I think this is important. Most of the time, when people teach the book of Joshua, they jump right into the wonderful story of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. But I think this is important to take a look. Now, God parted the Red Sea through Moses, allowing the Israelites to escape from the Egyptians. In the book of Joshua, God stops the flow of the river Jordan, enabling the Israelites to cross into the promised land. So we can see a parallel. Secondly, Moses was the leader appointed by God, and he is the one who guided the children of Israel through the parted sea. In Joshua, who succeeded Moses, guides the Israelites through the parted sea, or the river, signifying the continuation of God's guidance through the new chosen leader. This helps to confirm Joshua's leadership. Let's face it, Moses would be a hard act to follow. There never was anyone like Moses, the Bible tells us. And so Joshua, he's going to have a difficult time filling the shoes of Moses. But this helps him establish control. Then there was the act of faith. The Israelites had to trust Moses' leadership and God's promises to deliver them from the Egyptians. Remember, they were faced with the Red Sea in front of them and the army of Egypt behind them, and they had to step into the water for it to open. And we see a very similar thing happen with Joshua. The Israelites demonstrated their faith by following Joshua, led by the Ark of the Covenant, and they stepped into the river, trusting that God would hold back the water. So it required faith, not only on the part of Joshua, but on the part of the Israelites, just as there was that step of faith crossing the Red Sea. And finally, the crossing of the Red Sea with Moses marked the beginning of the Israelites' journey from slavery in Egypt to freedom. Now, the crossing of the Jordan River is going to signify the transition from wandering in the wilderness to entering in to the promised land. And so we see that both events are a new beginning, a new start, a new chapter in the story of the Israelites. The next thing that we're going to see is the Battle of Jericho. Now, most of us know the story pretty well. The Israelites marched around Jericho for 7 days. On the seventh day, after marching around the city, the people shouted, blew their trumpets, and the walls collapsed outward. Now, this is significant because if the walls had fallen in, the amount of debris would have made it impossible. Remember, houses were built into the walls. And if the walls had fallen in, they would have fallen on top of the homes that were there, and it would have made difficult times for the Israelites to actually enter the city. But the scripture tells us the walls of Jericho fell flat. The idea was they fell outward. Now, this is highly unusual. It seems to indicate that this is a miraculous deliverance by God. It wasn't the Israelite army that was pushing their way in. It was God from the inside pushing the walls out. Now, it's important for us to understand that what is taking place here is not a victory because of Israel's might. All they did was march around the city one time for 6 days, and on the seventh day they marched around a seventh time, and after that they simply blew the trumpets and shouted, and the walls collapsed. The moral